The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Gaining Market Access for Mobile Medical Applications. Our guest speaker today are Anura Fernando. He is the Principal Engineering Medical Software and System Interoperability, and Laura Elan. She is the Program Manager with Life and Health Sciences UL LLC. Anura holds degrees in Electrical Engineering, Biology or Chemistry, and Software Engineering. He has 16 years of experience at UL with Safety, Critical Software and Control Systems certification, and has also conducted safety science research across multiple application domains: industrial automation, alternative energy, medical, hazardous locations, appliances, optical radiation, nanotechnology, battery technologies, etc. He has generated publications in predictive modeling and risk analysis, cybersecurity, systems of systems, software, health, IT, apps, and medical device safety. Anura has been engaged in projects with numerous Fortune 500 companies, DoD, DOE, DHS, FDA, FCC, ONC, NASA, and several US national laboratories. He has contributed to the development of several standards involving software and functional safety as a member in IEC, ISO, ASME committees, and served as an IECE expert task force member. Anura currently has global responsibility for medical device software certification at UL and serves as UL's technical lead for the development of the AAM UL 2800 family of standards for interoperable medical device interface safety. He is a member of the Federal Advisory Committee, FDA Safety and Innovation Act, WG, FDA Medical Device Interoperability Coordinating Council, Medical Device Interoperability Safety Working Group, NIH, QMDI Program Advisory Committee, the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, and the International Council on Systems Engineering, along with IEC and ISO, where he is involved in a number of interoperability-related committees for standards development. Laura Elan is a program manager with the Life and Health Sciences Business Unit of UL LLC and the global service leader for UL's eHealth and interoperability business. She is a former UL associate with approximately 15 years experience in medical electrical equipment, X-ray, and programmable systems. She is currently supporting software certification and operational efficiency for the Global Medical Device Organization. Elan's experience is grounded in 12 years in senior leadership roles with R&D and manufacturing organizations, including pharmaceutical, medical devices, commercial and consumer electronic companies. She has led across functional product development organizations as both a technical and project leader. Laura holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and master's degree in electrical engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology. She is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Illinois. So, without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speakers. Over to you, Anura.
Thank you very much. We'll start off by taking a quick look at the topics that we'll cover this afternoon, starting with megatrends for healthcare system safety, and we'll move into an overview of mobile medical applications and take a look at the regulatory landscape there. And finally, we'll wrap up with about 15 minutes of Q&A. So to begin, UL monitors healthcare system safety megatrends and tries to help address public safety concerns. We work with a number of different regulators and a number of other organizations that have similar interest. So to start off this discussion of mobile apps and so forth, we'll start by taking a look at what is currently going on in the world relative to drivers for these types of technologies, mobile apps, wearable devices, etc. So we see that the world's population is aging significantly. They say by 2050, 1 person in 3 will be over 65 and 1 person in 10 will be over the age of 80. And so this change in demographics is an important reason that certain technologies are now becoming very, very pervasive in the market, and we'll take a look at those. So along with the aging demographic, we have the issue of managing things that come with age. For example, chronic disease. We see that there is a significant growth in the number of aging people, and along with that comes the need to manage chronic disease issues, things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, etc. And we can see that by the year 2030, almost half the population of the U.S. is going to be dealing with these types of diseases. Along with this comes the need for health care. So we see that over time, the demand for health care and for physicians and other clinicians is going to increase substantially as the rate of chronic disease increases and so forth. Similarly, we see that the corresponding supply of these physicians and clinicians is not expanding at the same rate. It's remaining pretty flat into 2020. And so we have this disparity of the needed clinicians versus the available clinicians. Then looking at the economic side of this, we see that moving into close to 2040, we see that this continued trend of significant healthcare spending in the U.S. And this is a growing national concern as we spend a greater part of our gross domestic product on healthcare. So how can this type of problem be solved? How can we deal with managing this changing demographic and continually increasing cost? One approach is to introduce mechanisms to reduce cost and increase efficiency with how healthcare is delivered. And there are a number of different ways to go about this. Going back to the 2008 timeframe, there was a significant amount of money injected into the U.S. economy under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and similar things were taking place in Europe and Australia, etc., to drive technologies that would help to facilitate this reduction in cost and improvement in efficiency. And so many of the technologies that were sought after were commodity technologies, communication technologies, computation technologies, things that could be interconnected and bring data together in a way that creates what we now call e-health or electronic health and m-health or mobile health. So along with these computing and communication technologies, the idea was to understand how these technologies could be used to reduce healthcare costs. And so we saw that computation carries with it inputs and outputs. And so on the input side, we see that this field of sensors is significantly growing. Just from 2012 to 2017, here we see some projections and the millions of units of sensors getting out onto the market. We see, all the people who live with chronic disease, and we ask ourselves, with pervasive technologies like this, how can they be used to manage healthcare? So these technologies can find many different homes. Healthcare is really a broad spectrum modality in society. We have the traditional forms of medicine that we think about, where you go into the doctor's office, what we call the acute care setting, and you're connected to maybe many different devices and the hospital environment, and they gather information about your physiological state and provide diagnostically useful information to clinicians. But similarly, as this demographic change takes place that we talked about before, we also have what's called aging in place occurring. And this is where, as folks get older and older, they don't necessarily want to move into an assisted living facility or like a nursing care facility and that type of thing. And they are looking for technologies to help them remain at home where they're comfortable and receive the kind of medical care that they need. And this is what we call home health care, telemedicine, or in some cases mobile health. So what we're seeing is that as these needs of different stakeholders in society change, we're starting to recognize this growing ecosystem where it's not only dealing with your primary care physician in the office, but then taking the data that they might gather and providing it to the pharmacy to get your prescriptions in line before you leave the hospital even, dealing with home care after you're released from the hospital setting, exchanging data with imaging, like radiology departments and so forth, diagnostic labs that might be running the lab tests and those types of things. And so we see that data being able to support all these different functions across the healthcare ecosystem is an extremely important aspect of what eHealth and mHealth are about. So the maturity that industry needs to experience is sort of multifaceted. We have to begin, which is essentially where we are now, with two initial steps. First, we need to digitize everything. We need to move from paper records and so forth into digital records. Then we need to be able to view and exchange this data. And currently, it's pretty significantly within a single enterprise, so within a single healthcare system, for example. But then we'd like to get to the point with health information exchanges and so forth where we can exchange health-related data between enterprises as well. And then as we become more and more mature in this space, we'd like to be able to derive value and intelligence from this data and ultimately deliver new types of clinical support, advanced clinical decision support with telemedicine, remote health, multiple experts from maybe different parts of the world being able to come together to provide consultation and things like that. And so we have this really broad horizon of opportunities to look forward to in healthcare. So one of the keys to achieving this is to look at what technologies are available to drive this kind of change in healthcare. We are familiar with certain technologies that are pretty much in all parts of the world now. We see things like cell phones, we see wearable computing devices of all sorts, things like wristwatches, pendants, jewelry, etc. And all of these things are loaded with sensors that can be used to acquire physiological information and capture that and potentially use it in very diagnostically and therapeutically useful ways. So if we look at mobile phone technologies alone, mobile phones are everywhere. The map that you see coming up on your screen shows the mobile phone use density around the world. And if we then compare that with the physician density, we see that in different parts of the world, when you look at physicians per 1,000 people population, the density is not nearly as much as the density of mobile phone technologies. So when we look at the functional capabilities of technologies like mobile phones, we see that we have voice and data services that can support mobile health. We have broad coverage of this around the world, and leveraging these technologies by developing software and components that can be enabling technologies for healthcare is one of the key drivers. And so as we look at each of these technologies somewhat closely, so as you take a look at this new screen, you'll see a typical mobile phone has many, many different sensors, things like accelerometers that can be used to tell if elderly people might be falling down, gyroscopes, magnetometers, etc. All of these things can be used for gathering information. And so when we look at things like body area networks, we can see that different sensor technologies can be deployed on different parts of the body to gather different types of physiological data. They can use technologies like, Bluetooth and different communication technologies like that to route that information to gateways like the phone, like the gateway, internet gateway, etc. But the idea is to gather all of this disparate data and aggregate it in a way that, again, can be diagnostically or therapeutically useful. And pulling all this data together can accomplish a lot of different benefits. For example, smart alarms. One of the most significant problems in the healthcare setting right now is having what's called alarm fatigue. And that's where a clinician hears alarms constantly and becomes desensitized to them. Using these kinds of technologies, you can actually build logical intelligence in such that if you inflate a blood pressure cuff, it knows to suppress the alarm function on a pulse oximeter. So the market has already started to respond to these kinds of things. We see some technologies that are already regulated. The FDA has cleared over 100 mobile apps already, some of them transform devices into communication devices, into medical devices, etc. And the regulators have begun to consider the risks. So there are a number of different regulations and guidance documents that have been released around this. The focus of today's discussion, which we'll get into in the second half in more detail, is the mobile medical app guidance. But regulations really look at a number of different facets of the technology. It looks at enabling technologies, for example, Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Bluetooth, Ethernet, etc. It looks at the product itself, that's using these enabling technologies to achieve a medical function. Finally, it looks at the use and the usability of these products. Many of the guidance documents and so forth you saw on the previous slide point to the need for usability testing. Whenever we look at a new technology, it's very important to understand what risk might be associated with that technology. And there's an engineering methodology that you all helped to develop along with Hewlett-Packard called hazard-based safety engineering. And this is a fairly fundamental tenet around risk management. So as soon as this slide loads here, we'll take a look at that process. It is looking at how a hazardous source, for example, a source of hazardous energy like electricity or radiation, might transfer to a susceptible part. The hazardous energy, if it gets to the susceptible part, will ultimately cause harm. And examining the transfer mechanism of how that hazardous energy might reach the susceptible part and making risk control decisions on how to either eliminate it, guard against it, reduce the susceptibility of the part, or warn against it is the basic methodology. When we take a look at all of these different hazards, there are energy hazards, there are data hazards. So energy hazards might be kinetic energy or potential energy. Data hazards might be related to the acquisition, storage, or propagation of data. Use hazards might have to do with the safety and effectiveness, looking at interoperability, performance, etc. And so you all provide standards-based testing and certification to address hazards at all these different levels. We can help to develop assurance cases, we can provide safety certifications, certificates of conformance for different markets, and product marks that help to convey the critical information about these different hazards so that system integrators can effectively use that information. So if we look at a specific technology, like wearable technologies are very popular now, looking at maybe augmented reality glasses, we have to ask ourselves, are there any hazards here? So as we look at a wearable technology, we can see as the next slide loads that when you're dealing with an interface to the human body, you have to think about a lot of different things. You have to think about things like optical radiation. How is the image being projected into the eye? Is there UV radiation being generated by that? Then from a more data-centric perspective, it's important to think about the privacy issues, like in the U.S. there's HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability Assurance Act, and there's performance, for example, of this device were used by a doctor. What's the criticality of that information that they're saying is perhaps they're performing surgery or something like that that's assisted by this. Similarly, if you look at the interface to the ear, you need to ask questions like how much acoustic energy is being transferred, can that cause damage to my hearing? Data integrity and usability, for example, if I'm projecting something in my field of vision, is that going to potentially create its own hazard? So UL works with a number of different government agencies really around the world. Here we've shown some in the U.S. So we participated in the FIDASIA working group last summer, which helped FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, work together with the Federal Communication Commission and the Office of the National Coordinator to determine what types of regulations might be needed. They wanted to understand how to deal with risks from mobile devices and wearable devices, and looking at what kinds of things needed to be considered as apps were being developed. It looks like we're having a little delay with the slides loading here. Okay, we'll try moving forward and see if that helps with the loading of the slide. So, so here we see that some of these apps might be low risk or unregulated. For example, they're just personal wellness types of things, monitoring your exercise and those kinds of things. Then we see that there might be higher risk devices that are under regulatory scrutiny. So if that same app monitoring that same sensor input might be used in a typically regulated medical device, then that would be regulated software. It's also important to understand the use cases when you develop an app like this. For instance, is it going to be in And it looks like we're having a little bit of loading trouble again here. So I'll continue on. So when we look at risks across the entire ecosystem of where these apps might exist, we see that they can be used in the home care setting, for example, where maybe you have medical devices in your own home. That information could get transferred via cellular technology or through internet gateway. It might go directly to a healthcare facility. It might go to a call center and so forth. That information might go to your payer, the insurance provider, etc. Or it might go to a first responder, and the data might go directly, it might go through the cloud, etc. And apologies, it looks like the slide's not loading again. So we'll try to continue on here. And actually, if I could ask the moderator, we've missed several slides here.
You can quickly go back to the slides, Anura.
Okay. So to try exiting PowerPoint and then coming back.
You can go to the previous slide from your end. So it might take you to the slides that you have missed. Can you go to the previous slide?
Sure. Okay, so
And yeah, the slides are loading from my perspective.
Okay. Okay. So even though the audience view isn't loading, you're still seeing them?
Yes, we are able to see it. It's
Yes.
higher risk regulated right now, considering risk across the ecosystem.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so the audience view just isn't updating appropriately.
As there are working in the slide, there is a lot of transition happening within the slide, so that's why it's not able to update.
I see. Understood. Okay, thanks. Okay. So when we look across this ecosystem, it becomes important to understand the risks with safety-related data. As data is moved from point A to point B, it's important to understand if we can have single event upsets or data corruption, for instance. It's also important to understand what happens if no data is transferred at all from point A to point B. Similarly, if you have an app that's inactive but a device that's running and thinking it's receiving data, what kinds of problems might there be from a timing perspective? What happens if a connection prematurely terminates? From a system safety and security perspective, when we look across this whole ecosystem, it becomes important to think about what kinds of problems can occur. We just saw some different data corruption issues. Then along those same lines, can somebody maliciously try to get at that data and do bad things with it? So when you think about all these things and you start to make claims about what your product can and can't do, it's important to look at different tests that can support those claims. So many of those guidance documents we saw in the earlier slide talk about things like coexistence testing and cryptographic verification. And so I will now hand over to my colleague Laura Lan to talk in more detail about the FDA guidance on mobile medical apps.
Thank you, Anura. Can you, yeah, let's transition to the next slide. So good afternoon. We will have to do some pinging of our slide transition here as Anura and I are talking from different locations. But as we're transitioning into the second part of our presentation, Anura has spoke to technologies and risks associated with mobile medical applications and some of the different applications that these devices are actually performing in the healthcare ecosystem. So are there regulations for that? If I want to go ahead and hit the continue button here, Anura.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
Yeah, so Anura spoke to a number of the regulations that have been evolving over the last couple of years within the United States. And after being a draft document for over 2 years, at the end of 2013, the FDA has published a guidance document for mobile medical applications. A few caveats about guidance documents that FDA publishes. These recommendations are in fact non-binding recommendations. So they do not reflect regulatory law in the United States, but what they do is they contain the FDA's current thinking and thinking about how the products which are the subject of the guidance fall within the scope of regulations, and they support information to manufacturers as well as to the FDA auditors as to specific areas, specific guidance, specific procedures that can be used in order to assure that we have an equitable translation of the current federal regulations. There are alternative approaches that are possible, and the methods that are defined in the guidance documents, as they are non-binding, they are also non-specific, as well as having they are not legally enforceable, and therefore, again, just provide guidance to manufacturers. So why then publish a guidance document? And there's a couple of different areas and reasons for that. Anura spoke to some of the background, and we see a tremendous amount of cellular accessibility worldwide, and we pair that against a decreasing number of physician access. And so innovation, and many of you work in companies as well, recognizing the need for innovating around this area, this technology enabling area. And there's been a tremendous amount of expansion in a number of mobile applications in healthcare and the wellness space. Over the last 2 years, the industry has had comment period and information being able to present back to the FDA looking for guidance and what does it mean? What are these applications regulated? And so the guidance document has been published to help both industry determine what software applications that are intended to be used on mobile platforms really fall under the regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations in the United States, and to be very careful about clarifying what is included as a mobile medical application as a medical device and what it actually is not. And we spoke a little bit about the guidance document reflects the internal view of the current regulatory science. And so not only does this guidance provide information to manufacturers such as yourself, but also provides guidance to specific auditors of the FDA and assures that we have applicable translation of the Code of Federal Regulations into this new technology space. The scope of the guideline looks at a very specific subset of mobile applications. Very specifically, software that is a medical device. And we'll speak a little bit about how do we determine what a medical device is. The scope of the guideline also looks at accessories and software on mobile platforms that are used as an accessory to a regulated mobile device. And it also looks at mobile medical applications that transform a mobile platform into a regulated medical device. And so let's talk about some of these definitions. What's a mobile platform? Well, this consists of some commercial off-the-shelf type hardware, for example, smartphones, tablet computers, other portable computers, but that can also be things such as wearable technologies. And we begin to see more and more devices which can be worn on the body. While they may not be necessarily commercially off-the-shelf technologies, they may be specific technologies manufactured by manufacturers, but they're really intended to be purchased and by both clinicians as well as the public, and they specifically are computing platforms. So they can run software applications, everything from very simple user interface and signal generating type devices to very complicated user interface and graphical images. A mobile application then is that software application that runs on that mobile platform. So that would be the actual software program that's intended to be loaded on that tablet computer or that smartphone type device. It may also be a web-based software application. So when we think of mobile applications, we're not necessarily thinking of something that can be carried from room to room, but a mobile application can also be a software program which can be run on a computer, a laptop computer, or even a desktop computer within an office or clinician practice within a person's home. And it is in fact portable because it can be moved from one computing platform to the next. Mobile medical applications, therefore, are very specifically any medical app, any software that runs on a mobile platform that meets the definition in the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act in Section 201H of the Code of Federal Regulations. So specifically the language within the requirements say that a mobile medical app then is a medical device if it's used as an accessory to a regulated medical device or transforms that platform into a regulated medical device. And so what do we mean when we say medical device? Again, coming from the Code of Federal Regulations, which you can, in fact, if you have a lot of time on your hands, can access through the FDA .gov website. The Code of Federal Regulations is available to the public. And if you go into Section 201H, it specifically states that a medical device, some type of instrument, apparatus, machine, contrivance, has a lot of different words to describe something, an implementation, intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of the disease in man, or if it's intended to affect the structure or function of the body in man or in other animals. So that definition is very specific in the United States. There are definitions from the regulations for Europe as well. Similar, not exactly the same. Our focus today is in the U.S. However, we have to be mindful that in different regions of the world, what defines a medical device may be a little bit different than that in the U.S. So given that we have this definition for a medical device, if we go back to the idea that I might have a mobile application, something that's running on a mobile platform that has some kind of wireless, possibly a connectivity, or some software that's running on a platform, it's not necessarily a mobile medical application. And we want to be very clear about that, because the first step in determining whether or not the regulatory requirements for mobile devices would apply to the application, the mobile app that would be under our consideration, is to first determine whether or not that mobile app meets the definition of a medical device. So first step in our understanding the regulatory landscape for mobile medical devices is to apply that definition. And again, guidance documents are available for the process of walking through that. So how do we start with that? The first thing that's important to understand for mobile medical application is what is its intended use. Intended use is communicated as in essence, what is its clinical function or clinical claims? And these claims are available on the product labeling. And labeling includes, by definition for U.S. law, the labeling includes a number of different kinds of documents, presentations, oral communications, statements. So it would include not only the label, specific labels on the products, on the product packaging, information included in your user manuals, but also advertising materials, any training or sales promotion, or any statements that the manufacturer yourself or your sales and distribution representatives would make about the clinical use of the product. So being able to define and understand the intended use of the medical device is an important first step in determining whether or not you have a device which needs to meet the regulatory law within the United States. As a medical mobile manufacturer, it's the manufacturer's responsibility to first understand that. And we want to talk specifically about that definition as well, because the mobile medical application guideline is very specific and provides some type of exemptions for what is a mobile medical application. Specifically per the Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, anyone who initiates specifications, designs, labels, or creates a software system or application for a regulated medical device in whole or in part. So if you're a software development organization and you work along with a contract hardware and you actually do the design inputs, you define the product, the specifications, you actually do the coding and industrial design, you write the technical manuals. That may be one organization, that may be a collection of organizations, but that's included within the overall scope of a medical application manufacturer. But those parties that are excluded are very specific in this domain, and because we know that mobile applications, not only in medical but also in consumer and other applications, are distributed via stores like Google Play and the iTunes App Store. The FDA has been very specific to exclude those parties who exclusively distribute without engaging in any manufacturing functions. So what do we mean by that? Without designing, redesigning, relabeling, respecifying any of the application or the application's intended use, as we spoke about where the intended use resides. So, Anura, could you step back a little bit, please? Thank you. Well, third parties then who solely provide market access don't engage in manufacturing functions and therefore would not be a mobile medical application manufacturer. And that would include any of those providers of tools, services, or the infrastructure. For example, that would include internet service providers, manufacturers of general purpose computers for which I would use to download that application, customer support services, cloud hosting services, and examples like that where again it's a service that's providing that application without doing any kind of modification or what the FDA defines as design or manufacturing of the mobile application. So these kinds of companies are specifically excluded from the definition of being a mobile application. And there are a couple other different kinds of entities that are also excluded. So licensed practitioners who actually generate mobile applications specifically for use in their professional practice. Those folks who are not intending to label or promote that application and it's generally used in the practice itself are also exempt from being defined as a mobile medical application manufacturer. In addition to persons who manufacture apps solely for the use in research or teaching environments. We'll wait till we transition. So let's talk a little bit about what applications then are in the regulatory oversight of the FDA. The mobile medical applications document does have very specific instructions to mobile app developers on how to understand and clarify as we go through intended use statements. So again, understanding your intended use and then being able to work through the guidance helps us understand whether or not my mobile application is going to be a mobile medical application and subject to regulatory oversight, or if it falls within an area where it would not be. One of the first specific definitions and one of the subsets that we see the FDA defining as part of that scope of devices with regulatory oversight is for purposes of controlling the device or displaying or storing, analyzing, or transmitting specific medical device data. Amira, could you go back one slide, please? Thank you. A couple of examples of that, and again, controlling, displaying, storing, or specific medical device data could include things like delivery of insulin on an insulin pump. So that could include patient-specific medical information such as dosage size. Displaying, storing, or analyzing data could possibly be EEG waveforms, very specifically picture archiving and communication systems, capturing and possibly even having algorithms which analyze those images would definitely fall under the oversight of FDA's regulations and the U.S. regulatory law. Let's go then to the next slide. The other scope is mobile apps that transform the mobile platform into a regulated medical device. And Nora has spoke to that earlier in our presentation today, where there are a number of examples of software which then actually, when loaded on the mobile platform, creates an intended use similar to, say, a specific medical device. Blood glucose readers, ultrasound machines. As you can see, some of these are imaging devices, very specific examples of currently regulated and devices which have been registered for market within the United States. Another type of regulatory oversight is any type of software application that performs patient-specific analysis and can provide patient-specific diagnosis or treatment recommendations. And this might very well be an example of calculating drug dosage for a specific patient based on age, weight, and other types of attributes. The guidance document provides a number of different examples as a part of the of its language there, and you can see we've got very specific descriptions of devices such as attachments that treat acne or reduce wrinkles, mobile apps that provide wireless remote controls for CT or X-ray machines. We can move to the next slide. Other kinds of examples that are very specifically detailed in the mobile medical application include things such as devices which would change settings of implantable neuromuscular stimulators, devices that would control hearing aid, blood pressure cuffs, or other mobile apps that connect to a physician's facility and provide device data for a physician's use in clinical diagnosis and clinical monitoring. Next slide, please. We have other applications. There is the medical device data system final rule, which is another part of the regulatory landscape that may affect mobile medical applications. And that final rule says that any type of network system that would transmit, communicate, store, or in essence, communicate data without necessarily transforming that data can be a Class 1 medical device. And that could be also true of mobile medical applications. They could be serving as a medical device data system in that they're being used as a conduit or a gateway or possibly even a mechanism for storing data which may be generated from other devices as well. And then we've got mobile apps specifically to perinatal monitoring and other monitoring type systems that would fall within the oversight of the regulations. However, there is this notion of enforcement discretion. In the FDA has been very specific that it does not intend to enforce the requirements under the FDA Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to all mobile apps. There are very specifically some kinds of mobile apps that, while they may be interacting with patients and may be related to medical data, that by virtue of the intended use and the risk, and Anura spoke very specifically to certain types of risk profiles that could occur for mobile medical apps, that the FDA then would not enforce the requirements of the Federal Drug and Cosmetic Act while using this enforcement discretion. So, for example, patients' self-management. It could include access to information related to the patient's health conditions or applications intended to communicate to their healthcare providers. Again, the guidance provides a lot of information very specifically about these types of applications, and we always go back to the product's intended use. An important element, and I'll repeat it, to look through all of the labeling for your product and to be assured of your communication of intended use through the labeling and labeling claims. Anura, could we move forward? I'll give you a couple of examples of mobile apps that are not regulated by the FDA and those that the FDA would not apply the oversight. And that would be, specific generic text search capabilities. So, for example, as a nurse or physician, if I'm looking up information, that might be a mobile app that is not regulated as long as its intended use falls within that very narrow definition. That would include mobile apps intended as education tools or medical training tools, or possibly even tools to reinforce training for clinicians. Other types of devices that are intended for patient education, very specific, patient awareness and empowerment for their own health and wellness, and other types of applications that provide efficiency within a clinician's healthcare setting, not intended for, again, diagnosis of disease or other conditions for the cure, mitigation, or treatment of patient disease. The last, we've seen a number of applications too that again fall outside of the scope, things like magnifying glasses or recording devices or maps and things of this nature, general information type systems that fall outside the scope of a mobile medical application. So we have an interesting landscape. And while we have a number of applications and mobile apps that do in fact interface with both patients and clinicians in the context of using, modifying, or providing data or information, they don't always fall within the definition of a mobile medical device. But if they do, depending upon the risk profile, which would then help define whether the device is a Class 1 device, and we spoke to that in the context of a medical device data system, or possibly a Class 2 or Class 3 medical device, there are in fact additional regulatory requirements than a mobile medical application manufacturer would need to consider. These types of requirements are consistent with a medical device manufacturer that is, designing, classic mechanical, electrical, medical device. And so while there are certainly specific software requirements and additional guidances that would need to be considered by manufacturers, once you understand the intended use of your product and match it against those applications within the guidance document to determine whether or not your product falls under the regulatory space or not, is the first most important step in determining then where does your product fall within the U.S. and in terms of the regulations applied to that. It's an important not only to understand the intended use, but also the risk profile for that. We know that there are, millions of smartphone users worldwide, and companies such as yourself are innovating in this space for improvement of overall health and access to healthcare specific applications. It is certainly the intention to be very clear that while understanding that this space has a great opportunity for manufacturers, we don't want to stifle innovation by applying too much regulation, and yet at the same time we need to also be cognizant of the risks associated, and those risks then do come through once the intended use is defined. What happens when that medical mobile application doesn't operate as it's intended or as it's specified? So what we have is a landscape which allows us then to manage not only intended use and risk in an area that says it's important to be able to assure that we have patient safety first and foremost in mind, and there's a number of ways that you all can help you in this area as well, not only for mobile medical applications, but across the entire sphere of e-health and m-health and interoperability in this space. So we're coming up very quickly on the end. I apologize for the time, but we do want to leave some time for questions and answers. At this point in time, I'm going to ask Anura and our moderator to accept questions, and we'll answer those questions for you.
Thanks for the insightful presentation, Anura and Laura. Let's quickly take up the questions now. I request you to read out the questions and their answers so that all our users may listen to your insights. Anura, are you able to see the questions?
Yes. Okay. So the first question is, actually, I'm looking through the chat field. I am not seeing any questions posed yet.
Well, I would certainly encourage attendees today. On your screen, you see that there is an email address, and we would welcome your questions to medical.inquiry@ul.com. If you have additional information, please send us your questions, and we will certainly be happy to answer you directly.
Are you able to see the questions?
No, there are a number of chat items in the chat box, but no questions posed by the audience.
All right. Are you able to see the questions doc? In the control panel, can you see the questions doc?
I can. It's hung up right now. When I try to expand it, I've got just a rotating bar that has grayed out the background screen.
All right. So you don't have the access to see the questions. Can you see them now? Do you want me to read out the questions for you? Would that be helpful?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
All right. The first question comes from Raghavendra, and he's asking if the medical device is integrated with a CE marked and approved Bluetooth chip. Is it required to test EMC and performance related to Bluetooth chip?
Yes, so the performance and EMC characteristics are independent of the protocol certification, and so it needs to be tested in the end product, including the end product functionality.
Next question comes from Subramaniam. He's asking, I would like to understand more on FDA's regulation on mobile apps subject to enforcement's discretion.
Okay, so enforcement discretion is what we call class 0, and there are a number of areas. So for example, electronic health records have been defined by the FDA as being class 0 devices. So even if they're directly acquiring data from medical devices, for instance, they would still be under enforcement discretion from an FDA regulatory perspective, although they would still be subject to other applicable regulations like ONC meaningful use for CMS reimbursement.
Comes from Mohan, and he's asking, how is the same app used for low risk and high risk application be controlled if there are no regulations at the lower end?
Yeah, so if you're developing apps for multiple risk profiles, then at the high risk side, you would have to implement all the design controls that would be required for the high risk category class 2 or class 3. And so you could still maintain those. Many of those are normal software development lifecycle process types of design controls anyway. And so maintaining those on the low risk side would sort of come along with them being required for the high-risk applications.
Question comes from Dheeraj, and he's asking, you talked about derived value and intelligence to improve quality as well as use of big data. How important is root cause analysis using historic medical data? That is both structured data, example blood test, analysis, reports, as well as unstructured data, example heart x-ray, which is done in a secure way without compromising on data privacy regulations like HIPAA, etc. Where do we stand today with respect to technology available for medical data analysis?
Sure. So the adverse event reporting in the U.S. is currently less than optimal. If you have tools to ensure data provenance or to trace data provenance, then that can be very useful, but that type of infrastructure is not yet required. UL is currently working on a series of interoperability standards that are tied to ASTM F2761, which includes data logger functionality. And so when you have that type of functionality built into the system, that makes data provenance tracking much easier from an adverse event root cause analysis perspective.
Dilip Joshi asks, our system is a remote monitoring system. We have an Android app which transmits, really sorry, give me 1 second, yeah, which transmits the vital data to a cloud application. The device that collects the vitals should be used in the home healthcare environment. We have a OTS mobile on which our app runs. My question is, do we need to do EMI or EMC tests for mobile as well? If so, what all tests need to be done?
Yeah, that would be a fairly extensive question to answer. What I would ask is that they contact UL and we can sit down and look at their design specifics and come up with a test plan. And certainly portions of that system would very likely be subject to the need for EMI, EMC testing.
Next question comes from Christopher, and he's asking, how does FDA have approved testing labs in India?
I am not sure that FDA has a list of approved testing labs, period. It's really driven by manufacturer claims, and it's up to the manufacturer to go to a suitable lab to do testing to support their claims if that's the route they choose. And of course, UL has labs in India, and we can support all of your testing needs to support regulatory claims.
Right, Anura, but due to time constraint, I have to request you to take the unanswered questions offline, which I will share with you through email. So if you would like to sum up the session today, you and Laura?
Sure. So we just wanted to thank everybody for attending. And again, if you have any questions on regulatory issues, market access, not only in the U.S. market, but any markets around the world, please contact us.
Laura, any closing lines from you as well?
No, I think I would like to thank everyone for their participation, and I think Anura has closed us nicely. So again, thanks for your participation to the attendees, and to TechGig for hosting our webinar.
And I'm really thankful to our guest speakers for conducting this wonderful webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Anura. Thank you, Laura, for all your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you as well.
Thank you. Have a great day ahead.
You too.